As I mentioned, in this course, we'll talk about Workday Advanced Reports. We'll talk about matrix reports. We'll talk about trending reports. We'll of course talk about all the different calculated fields, and then we'll also talk about a bit of search reports. They are all very similar to how an advanced report is built. Inbox reports, again, very similar. We'll also talk a bit about a composite report, and we'll also look at the use cases of a composite reporting. Okay, since you guys are already using Workday ecosystem, I would not spend a lot of time on the introduction. Usually I spend one or at least 1.5 hour right from the scratch, wherein I talk about, okay, what are the different report types in Workday, well, what is a report writer report, what is an espresso report, and so on and so forth. Instead of covering that, what I'll do is I'll ask you guys so that I understand what you know and what you don't know, and if there's something which you would still need some inputs on, I'll start with that topic. Okay, sure. So since you guys are already in Workday ecosystem, I'm sure you guys are already aware that there are Workday reports are broadly categorized into two categories, right? We have Workday standard reports, and then we have Workday custom reports, right? Okay, what are the two different types of standard reports in the system? So
Simple and advanced, I think.
no,
Custom,
those are
custom
custom
reports.
reports. Those are
Yeah.
custom reports. So within advanced reports, we have two types of advanced reports. Uh, the first one is uh, okay, before I even go there, uh, do you guys understand what is a object model in Workday? I'm sure you guys are already aware. Uh, Workday is a completely OOPS based programming language, right? And when I say OOPS, object oriented programming, it's a very generic term which is used across. So, for example, right from C++, Java, and many other technologies, they all use OOPS, right? Now, in OOPS, everything is an object. And when you guys built your reports, you guys would have also used objects. In reporting context, we call it a primary business object. So we'll talk about what is an object. You guys would have already come across this in your HCM certification, but then in the context of reporting, we'll drill down into OOPS a bit more detail, and that will help you understand the relationship between primary business object, related business objects, and how we get data and fields. So that whole concepts of that relationship and how that is leveraged by Workday reporting. Okay, so we'll talk about OOPS as well. So as I mentioned, standard reports in turn are of two types. The first is report writer reports. Heard of it?
Yeah.
And the second one is the
Express.
espresso reports. So what is the difference between a report writer report and a espresso report?
I think report writer is you can like create a report, but you need to have access of a report writer. And espresso reports are delivered reports, right? Workday
Okay,
delivered.
all right. So correct partially. So all standard reports are Workday delivered. That's why we call them standard reports. So all Workday delivered reports are referred to as standard reports, right? Which means we have standard report writer reports and standard espresso reports, right? The second thing, all reports that you build in the system, right, or they would have been built during your implementation, they are called custom reports. So these are also known as tenanted reports. So I'm sure you have heard of tenanted data and non-tenanted data. So all data that is Workday delivered, which means which is same across the tenants, right? This is known as non-tenanted data or not tenant specific. Any configuration that you do, any data that you transaction that you perform in the system, any report that you build in the system is tenanted because it's tenant specific. unless you move it to other tenants in the system in your landscape, that that data is just available in that one tenant, or that configuration or that report is just available in that one tenant. So all the reports that are built, right, by the users, by the implementers, by your administrators, they are all custom reports, right? So all standard reports are all Workday delivered. They are broadly not broadly, they are of two types: report writers and espresso reports. Now what is the difference? To understand that difference, how can I check all the standard reports in the system? Is there a way I can know how many standard reports are there? Or let's say your client asks you, okay, can you please get me, I need this data to look at compensation details of the employees, right? And the first thing that you do is, okay, is there a report available? Is there a standard report available for that? So how do you know what standard reports are available in a specific area, let's say compensation or absences or payroll and so on and so forth? Is there a way I can check that? Okay, so you can check all standard reports in the system. For that as well, Workday has delivered a report, and the report is called Workday Standard Reports. So if you go to this report, it will give you all the standard reports or Workday delivered reports. Now, you can run this report by selecting a specific category. So for example, you want to see the reports which are available within compensation, right? So I can either select a specific category and click on OK, and then it will give me reports from that category. And within compensation, there are 150 reports. So when I go there, it shows me the category that report belongs to, the name of the report, a brief description of what data that report gets you, but then the report type as well, right? So if you look at the type, you have report writer reports and then espresso reports, and these are the only two types of worked standard reports. The second thing, if you see, there are some probably around 100 or so categories in this list, right? So if you want to get, I think it's 160 or so categories. So one way to do is either you select all categories. Okay, there are 200 plus categories, right? Or the second way is you don't select any data and simply click OK. In either of those cases, it will give you all the reports. Now, why is this the case? When you don't select any data in the prompt, it gives you all data. We'll talk about this when we look at our own advanced reporting. So now, because I've not selected a specific category, if you see, it gives me some. So these are the overall number of reports that Workday has delivered, right? Once again, report writer or espresso. Now the question is, what is the difference between report writer report and an espresso report? So this is where you mentioned that report writer reports can be built, and so this is where that confusion arises. So whenever you see a standard report, the first thing to know is you cannot edit a standard report. A standard report cannot be edited, modified, changed, deleted. You can hide them if you want to, and I'll talk about that. How do you hide a standard report? I'll talk about that in a bit. But before that, let's say you want to modify a standard report, right? Your client has said, okay, can you give me some compensation data? And you see that there is a standard report available which matches your requirement. You just need to add one more column. That's all you have to do. Probably you just need to change your filter a bit. So if there's a standard report available which matches your requirement, probably 90%, 99%, 60%, so you don't want to build a custom report from scratch, right? Now, what do you do? What you can do is you can take a standard report, you can copy it into a custom report and then do whatever modifications you want to do. So standard reports cannot be edited, deleted, modified, but they can be copied into custom reports. So you can take a standard report, copy it, so it becomes your custom report, and then you can do whatever modifications you want. The advantage is now you have the entire standard report available, and then you can add your columns, delete your columns, or whatever basic modifications you want to do. But then when you want to copy a standard report, that's where the difference between these two report types come. Okay, let's quickly see that. If I go back, let's go to compensation once again. Uh, let's take this report. What I'll do is I'll open another tab. I'll open two tabs. First, let's look at this report, allowance plan, right? All right. So if you see this is a report, it gives me the same description that you see here, view the definition and so on and so forth. Let's run it, right? I'll select any allowance plan. Let's take the very first one, click OK. Okay, at the same time, let's also copy this report and run it in the other tab that we have opened, right? Again, a report. Let's run it. Okay. Okay, it doesn't give me any data. That's what we are not interested in the data right now. Now, this is where the difference between these two reports come. Now, if you see, this is a report of type report writer. So actual increase less than statutory minimum. This is a report writer report. Now, when I run it, what I can do is I can go to the additional actions of this standard report and then copy it, right? So I can copy a standard report of type report writer into a custom report. So when I go in here, I'm going to copy it, right? It gives me the same name, suffixes copy at the end, right? If I want, I can go ahead and change the name based on my requirement. All right. And now when I click OK, right? So it has copied the entire standard report for me, including the filters, including sub filters, including prompts, everything, except for obviously the share option, right? So when you initially create a report, that report is not available to anyone. So you've copied a standard report to custom report. Now you can do whatever modifications you want, and then you can share it with your users. So that is a report of type report writer. Now let's see what's happening with this other report, which is of type espresso. So when I go in here, again, I have this additional actions or the related actions button. But then the difference is this related actions is not the related actions of the report itself. If you see, this is a related actions of the plan that you're looking at. So any standard report of type espresso cannot be copied to create a custom report, right? And the reason you can copy a report of type report writer to create a custom report is because the tool that we use in Workday to build our reports, which is integrated within the Workday tenant, so that tool is known as report writer. So all the custom reports that we create in the system, they are all of type report writer, right? And that's why any standard report which is of type report writer can be copied as well, right? So we do not or we cannot create any espresso type of reports. So that's why any report which is of type espresso Workday delivered cannot be copied into a custom report because custom reports are of type report writer. Make sense?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so report writer reports can be copied. So I'm maintain these notes. If you guys think this is not relevant for you and you wouldn't want me to do that, I wouldn't maintain these notes for you, right? Usually when I take these classes, I'll maintain these high level notes and then I share it with the
Yeah, it's
students,
nice.
right?
Good. That's good. That's
Okay,
good, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, we want the notes.
okay, that's perfect. So a report writer report can be copied into a custom report. Okay, now if you see, you have copied a standard report, this one, and you have done whatever modifications that were relevant, and now this report is available. The problem is when you, obviously the same people who currently have access to this report, they are the ones, maybe let's say your compensation partners. They have said, okay, we have this report, or can you give us some additional fields? Now the problem is when they run this report, or any person who has access searches for this report, they'll come across both these reports, right? Now that would lead to confusion. So because you have copied a standard report into a custom report, now you don't want this standard report to be visible, right? You want to hide it. Now there's no option of sharing a standard report or not sharing a standard report. Anyone who has the access to the relevant domains, they automatically get access to the standard report. Now what do you do? What you can do is you can hide standard reports. uh, what is the task? Let me quickly check. I think probably I do not have access to the task. Okay, so this is the task, hide workday delivered reports. I think I do not have access to that task. Okay, no one currently has access to this task. Let me quickly change the access. What user are we logged in as? So this is usually the final when you do any implementation, because that's where all your custom reports are built. So before, usually when you go live, the final or one of the final steps uh, for your report delivery is that all those standard reports which are not required or which have been copied, they are all hidden, right? So this is one of the go live tasks within the reporting work stream. It's a very simple task, just like anything else in Workday.
So when we hide the reports,
Mhm.
like for example, we have to migrate. So how we have to do it in the production tenant, or it's
So standard reports are any which ways available, right? You don't have to
hmm,
migrate any standard reports.
okay?
Um, okay. Do we hide directly in production? Yes, that's what
Yeah.
we do, right?
Okay.
So we
Okay.
directly hide in production
Okay.
because there's no migration or package that is created for this.
Hmm.
Okay, this is not enabled. Let me quickly enable that. Oh, this is enabled. No permissions granted. Add permissions. So we'll give access. I'm not talking about any one of these because I understand you guys would already be aware of what I'm doing. I'm basically modifying a domain and giving access so that they would be able to access that task. Okay, I think Logan McNeil is a report administrator. So we'll also talk about report security, uh, which is again very similar to any other part of security, but behaves a bit different, right? So we'll also see what
So,
are
sir,
the
one question. So we'll see
Mhm.
all calculated fields, right here?
Yeah.
What? Okay, okay.
Okay, perfect. So now I can go in here. I can, if a given report, before you can hide a report, you need to know that if a given report is being referenced somewhere, for example, if that report is part of some dashboard, then you'll not be able to hide, right? And it will show you the report usage. So let's say this report is being used in some dashboard, right? Either standard or custom dashboard, then Workday would not allow you to hide that report. So it will show you, okay, this report is being already used, let's say in some integration, some EIB or any other dashboard or so on and so forth. So now what I can do is this report is hidden, which means even if I have access, I'll not be as an end user or any user for that matter. When I search for this report, that report will not be visible anymore. So users, they'll now only be able to search for the custom report and not the standard report. It wouldn't show me the custom report as well because the custom report that I created, that's currently not shared with anyone, right? So if I come back and unhide it now, show it, and now when I search it, you'll see now the report is available,
Is
right?
there a task to
Mhm.
find all the hidden reports? Like, how do I find?
If you go to this task, it will automatically show you. So all the
Okay.
reports that are hidden, maybe you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to change them for now, but if you go to this task, it will show you all hidden reports, right? So,
Okay.
okay. So to hide, we have the task, right? Oh, sorry. So the task is hide workday delivered reports. I believe I'm spelling it right. Hide workday delivered report to hide any standard reports in the system. Okay, Tell me one thing, can this task be used to hide both standard reports as well as custom reports, or do you think it can only be used to hide a standard report?
Standard report.
Okay, and how do I hide a custom report?
I will not give them the access in the share
Okay,
tab.
that's perfect. Okay, so the way I hide a custom report is by simply removing the share access, right? I'll simply say do not share with anyone, and that's all you need to do for hiding a custom report. Okay, so that is broadly how I can uh, categorize the Workday reports. Okay, similar to how we have seen this report, right? Workday standard reports. Is there a way I can check custom reports in the system?
I think it's view custom reports.
Okay, that's one way. But then I want to
And
see all custom reports in the system.
then I think it would be all custom reports.
Perfect. So we have this task called all custom reports, and you can use this task to view all the custom reports in the system. And this actually comes in very handy. So the very first project that I did, that was almost 5 years back, was an optimization project. What they wanted was they had almost 3000 plus custom reports in the system, right? People with access, they create reports and then they leave it. There are duplicate reports and so on and so forth. So they wanted to optimize their report inventory. They wanted to view all the custom reports in the system and then give recommendations. Some reports are not relevant, hide them, delete them. If there are different versions of the same report with slide modifications, combine them, and so on and so forth. So one of the and almost 50% of my work, um, I could manage because of this report. Now, what it does is it gives you some very useful metrics. So of course, it gives you all the custom reports in the system, the report type, the data source, the category, and so on and so forth, the report owner. But then the security group that report is shared with, if it is shared, which security groups it is shared with, which users it is shared with, what landing pages it is part of, whether it is a table type, chart type, and so on and so forth. In addition to that, it also gives me all these metrics. It basically shows me when was the report created, when was it last updated, and then when was it last executed, and how many times has it been executed in the last 6 months. Now this metrics actually came in very handy, right? Because let's say if a given report, so this is what we did. If a given report is not shared with anyone, right? And if it has not been executed, or probably just executed once in the last 6 months, or never executed, or the last run date was maybe a year back, then we know that that report is not relevant, right? Nobody is using that, and we can actually delete it. So this actually gives a lot of useful metrics, right? The advantage is you can simply copy this report, and then there's a lot of other metrics that you can add based on your requirement, right? So this is based on a data source called custom reports, wherein you can add, it's based on a business objects called custom reports, and then you can add a lot of other fields if you want to, right? To understand the data. Okay, so this is one report, and you also mentioned about view custom report. Now tell me, how is view custom report different from this report? Obviously one difference is this report shows you all the custom reports in the system. View custom report shows you one report at a time. But apart from that, is there any difference? So again, if the question didn't make sense, let me rephrase it. So one difference is all custom reports will list out all the custom reports in the system, right? Whereas view custom report allows you to select any custom report and then look at the details, right? So that's what we use view custom report for. So except for this difference between these two tasks, is there any other difference that you know or that you can think of? Okay, now in your production system, you may have hundreds of reports, right? Any typical implementation may have 500,000, 2,000 custom reports in the system. Would you have access to all of those custom reports? No, right? So for example, this custom report, if you see, it's grayed out to me and I do not have access to it, right? This report, it's highlighted and I know that I have access to this report, right? So in production system, issue comes, someone tells you, okay, this report is not giving me any data, right? Or someone just wants you to look at some custom report and you don't have access to that custom report, which means if I search for this report, because I don't have access to this report, I'll not be able to search it, right? So if you are a report writer, if you are a report administrator, you should have access to view a report or at least the definition of a report, even if you don't have access to it, right? Now, view custom report allows you to do that. So even if I don't have access to this report because the report is not shared with me, but then I am a report admin, which means I should be able to view the definition of this report. So I can use this report to look at the definition of this report, filter, prompts, and so on and so forth. And from here, I can manage or administer this report. So we see, because this report is not shared with me, I'll not be able to run it, right? I still cannot run it because the report is not shared with me, but I can still look at the details of this report. And from here, I can make other administrative changes. For example, I can transfer the ownership of this report. Or even if this report is not shared with me, I can edit it and then share it with myself to run it. And then once all the changes are done, I can edit it back and again unshare it for myself, right? So view custom report allows you to view a report even if that report is not shared with you. So view custom report, this task or this report is only accessible if you are a report writer or a report administrator. This task is not available to every user in the system. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. To view all custom reports in the tenant and only available to admins. When I say admins, I mean report admins, allows you to look at report definition and perform administrative tasks. Okay, perfect. Now, what are the two aspects or what are the two objects I would need or need to know if I'm building a custom report? So when you build a custom report, what is the first thing that you need to know or you usually do, even for the basic reports that you've been building till now?
Data source.
Okay,
And I think business object.
Perfect. Okay, so what is a business object? What is a data source? So when you select a data source on your report, um, what does that data source do? Or what do you basically analyze before you decide, okay, I'm going to select this particular data source? Okay, now this is where the object oriented programming or the concept of object comes into picture, right? Now, as I mentioned, objects are not workday specific. Uh, in fact, this technology um, has been in use, I think, for more than 20 years. So the first concept of objects came about with C++, right? I'm sure we have all studied it during our engineering. So we have this concept of an object, and that is what Workday refers to as a business object. Now, an object basically has three components, right? Okay, the first of those components are the attributes of that object. The second of those components are the instances of that object. And the third of those components are the actions that can be performed on that object, right? So for example, and this was a classic example that I learned when I was doing C++ in my college days. So an example of an object, a car is an example of an object, right? So what are the attributes of a car? Um, the car has a steering wheel, a car has four tires, it has a windshield. These are all attributes of a car. So every object has attributes, right? Again, a very generic example. Now, in the context of Workday, what is an object? Uh, Basically, everything is an object, right? So when you say a worker, worker is an object in Workday, right? When you say a position, again, position is an object in Workday, right? So everything that you take, organization, it's an object, a report is an object, a plan is an object, an absence is an object, a time off is an object, and so on and so forth. So everything in Workday is an object. As I mentioned, an object has attributes. So what are the attributes of an object? For example, worker, the name of the worker is his attribute, right? The age of the worker is an attribute. The gender of the worker is an attribute. The date of birth, the position that the worker occupies, that the the address of the worker or the dependents of the worker. These are all attributes of a worker. So all of these are attributes that define an object, right? And so on and so forth. So every object has one, not one, usually multiples and hundreds of multiples uh, of attributes, right? Now, how is it relevant for us when we are talking about reporting? When we are talking about reporting and when we are building any reports, right? The first thing you need to know, or the first thing that you analyze when you get a requirement, is what data is you need to extract, right? What is the central aspect for which you want to get your data? So for example, I can say, can you get me details of all employees, and let me put it here. I can say this way, I need the details of all employees in the tenant, right? and their compensation plans, right? Or I can ask you to deliver another requirement. Can you give me all compensation plans in the system and who they are assigned to? Now, how are these two requirements different? Are they same, first thing? And if they are different, um, how different they are, and how would you analyze in terms of a report build? So there are two statements, and if I ask you to get me reports for each one of these, do you think one report would be sufficient, or do you think you would need two reports?
So for the second report, I would ask, uh, do you want the current assignment, or do you
Okay.
want which year assignment do you want it for?
Okay. Let's say I want a current assignment. Let's keep it simple. So only assignment which is active as of now, right? For example, I could have been given a car allowance when I joined my organization way back in 2010, but it doesn't matter as of today, 2022, that I still have that car allowance. So I basically want all the plans or that and uh,
Mhm.
which are current.
So in the first report, it says all employees. It doesn't say workers.
Mhm. Okay.
So the first report is different. I will use a different data source
Mhm.
because it's only employees.
Okay.
And in second report, it doesn't mention whether you need employees or contractors. So
Mhm.
it would be all active and terminated workers.
Okay. All right. So a very valid thought process. So as per you, because the first report says only employees and the second report says everyone, so that's why you would need two different reports, one and two. Any other thoughts from anyone else they would want to contribute? Okay, perfect. So the first thing in Workday, and this is not related to reporting, in Workday, you cannot, Workday doesn't support compensation for anyone except employees. So if you take a contingent worker or a contractor, you cannot maintain any compensation for them, right? So it doesn't matter whether I say all employees or workers. In Workday, you any which ways cannot handle compensation for a contingent worker. So if you search for any compensation or any contingent worker in the system, and if you go to the additional actions and try assigning any compensation or any plans, you'll not be able to do that because Workday compensation doesn't support any contingent workers, right? Okay, now that's fine any which ways. Now, this is how I look at this requirement. What I want here is a list of all employees or all workers, whatever, it doesn't matter. So I have 10,000 employees in the system, which means, or let's say just 5 employees in the system. So in the first report, I need a list of all employees, EMP1, EMP2, EMP3, EMP100, whatever. And then I want a list of what plans are assigned to them. So employee one, he has a salary plan wherein he gets $1,000. He has a allowance one, allowance two, allowance three, or whatever. The employee two, he has an hourly plan. He has a period salary plan. He has again a few allowances. He has a commission plan and so on and so forth. So in first requirement, if you see, I want a list of all the employees in my system or whatever employee population they are asking for. And the plans are specific for those employees or in relation to those employees, right? On the second example, if you see, I still need basically the same data, but then the data I need is a bit different, right? So while ultimately I'm asking you to get me the same data, but then I'm not asking you to get me in the same format. So if you see in this case, what I'm asking you to do is get me all the compensation plans. So here, let's say I have a salary plan. I have 100 different allowances, allowance 1, allowance 2, allowance 3. I have 10 different period salary plans, period salary 1 and 2, and I have commission plans. I have one-time payment plans or whatever. So in the second case, if you see, what I actually want you to get me is a list of all compensation plans and who all they are assigned to. So all my employees or employee 1 till employee 6, they all have salary plan. Allowance plan is only assigned to employee 2. Allowance plan 2 is assigned to, and so on and so forth. So you see, I'm basically getting the same data, but then in terms of reporting, the way I would get this data would be different, right? And that's where your understanding of objects, business objects, related business objects, primary business objects, data sources come into picture, right? So in Workday, the way you get your report output depends on what primary business object you have selected, what related business objects are being referenced, what is the data source on that report, and so on and so forth. Okay, now that we know this information, what do you think I should do now? Will it still be okay? Now we understand, because um, the data output, this is how the data output would be, uh, and we obviously we would need two reports, right? This is report 1, this is report 2. Now, do you think I can build both these reports with the same business object or with the same data source? I'm not asking for which business object you would use, but do you think we can use the same business object or the same data source?
No,
Okay, that's
because the
perfect.
primary business object for the first one should be somewhere related to worker or employee, right? And this for the second one, it should be compensation plans.
Okay, so now that's perfect. So you've answered the question for yourself. So what is a attribute of an object? The attribute of an object are the fields associated with that object. So in terms of Workday, a business object is an object, right? So when I say worker, a position, these are all business objects in Workday. Now, each of these business objects have attributes. So what are the attributes of a position? The name of the position, the effective date of that position, the organization that position belongs to, and so on and so forth, right? And the employee who is currently occupying this position, and so on and so forth. So these are all attributes of a position. So the business object that you select on your custom report, right? The business object determines what which attributes or which columns can be included in your report, right? So now when I'm creating a report using the worker business object, I can pull in all the attributes of the worker business object that are defined on the worker. So I can pull in worker name, worker age, worker gender, worker position, dependents, and so on and so forth. The plans that the worker is assigned to, and so on and so forth. So in Workday, when you select a business object, and to begin with, we'll talk about primary business object. The primary business object or a business object that you select on your report, it determines which which columns or which fields can be added to your report, right? So every object has an attribute. In the context of Workday, these attributes are defined in terms of fields on the object. So how can you check all the fields on an object, or how can you view a business object? So I want to view worker BO. How can I do that?
BO colon worker. View.
Okay, it allows me to go to this report called business object details, right? So it takes me to this report, which is called business object details. So this is that report. It opens, and here when it would open, so either I can go this way, or I can go from here. Right? So it opens the business object details report. Okay, so all of these fields that you see here, these are the attributes of this particular business object, right? Now, obviously, these fields are Workday delivered, but then you see that we have also created our calculated fields, right? So these are the custom attributes that you have defined for this particular object, right? Okay, now we have two types of custom fields. One is calculated fields. That's what we'll look at. But then we also have something called custom fields or custom objects. Do you know the difference?
I just have one question. Is there
Mhm.
any task where I can find a list of all the business objects?
Mm, I am not aware. Let's see. There should be something. Business objects by category. All right, so we have 5,736 business objects. Okay, make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, now as I mentioned, we have the standard fields or the standard attributes, which is what we see here as Workday delivered. And then we have the custom. So we have calculated fields, but then have you guys heard of this custom fields? Okay, so what is a calculated field? A calculated field, I'll talk about this in detail later, but for now, a calculated field doesn't store any data, right? So for example, uh, I want to get, uh, let's say, the first name. So we in the system we have first name, right? Or on a worker we have first name, we have last name, right? And we also have full name and many other fields. Okay, I want to create a field which gives me last name with a colon in between, again a very hypothetical example, and then first name. So this is what I need on a report. So for example, in my case or someone else, let's say the first name is uh, Ravi, and then the last name is Smith. On the report, this is what I want: Smith colon Ravi, right? Now for this, I'll go ahead and create a calculated field. So what is a calculated field? A calculated field doesn't store any data, right? So tomorrow, if my last name changes, right? So I decide to change my last name from Ravi to Sharma. When I run this report, right, it will show me Sharma colon Ravi, right? So calculated field, as the name suggests, it dynamically calculates or determines the data when you run that report and then gives you the output, right? But then we also create something called custom fields in Workday. Now, custom fields, they actually store the data. So for example, first name, this field stores data in the system, right? Similarly, date of birth, it is not a calculated field. When you hire an employee, that's when you enter his or her hire date. That's when you enter his or her age, and so on and so forth. So that data is stays there permanently. You can change it, of course. That's a different story. But then that field actually stores that data or holds the data. But calculated field doesn't do that. When you run that report, it simply shows you that data. And when the report is gone, the data doesn't exist. But many times what you actually want is you want to store some custom attribute of an employee. Again, a very common example, which is given during all certifications. Let's say every employee that I hire, I give them a t-shirt, right? And for that, I need to know their shirt size, right? And I want to store this data for each worker so that every year I can pre-order these t-shirts based on the shirt size of the employees and then distribute it to them. Now, for this requirement, if you see, I cannot create a calculated field, right? I need to store the t-shirt size data for each worker. But then the problem is Workday has not delivered any such field to me. In that case, I can create custom objects. They are also known as custom fields. So the custom fields in turn are divided into calculated fields, and then we have the custom objects or the custom fields, right? But any which ways, we'll talk about those details later. So the first aspect of any business object are the attributes of that business object, and the context of Workday reporting. These attributes are represented in terms of the fields on that object. Those fields are Workday delivered, as well as we can create our own calculated fields, right? So when you build a report, the business object that you select, that business object basically determines the columns that would be available on your report, right? Or which fields can you reference on that report. So for example, if you're building a report, let's say on time types, right? Let's say there is a business object called time type. In time type, you cannot get the age of the worker, right? Because that business object doesn't store age of the worker. Maybe there's some related business objects through which you can get the data. That's a different story. We'll talk about that later. But then on a report, if you select the business object as absence or time type, you cannot get the age attribute of a worker through that business object, right? Okay, so the first aspect of selecting a business of building your report is to understand the what data you want to pull on this report and in what context you want to get this data. So if you see in both these requirements, I'm getting employee data, I'm getting compensation data. Here as well, I'm getting employee data, I'm getting compensation data. But then the difference is here I want to get data for workers or employees. So what I need is one row or whatever number of rows for each employee in the system. And then each of these employees may have one or multiple salary plans. So employee one is associated with one salary plan, maybe 10 allowance plans, and so on and so forth. However, the data I need is in the context of a worker. So if I have 6 workers, I need 6 rows. And for each of these rows, then I can have a multiple instances, right? In this case, again, I want to get the same data, but then I want to get the data in the context of the plans. So if I have 100 plans, the requirement is in this report, I need 100 rows of data. So the data I need is in the context of a plan. So I need for this salary plan, it is associated with 10 employees. This allowance, it is associated with 20 employees, right? So once again, you may want the same data, but in which layout do you want the data? That is also dependent on the business object that you select, right? So when you select a worker business object will give you, based on the data source that you select, rows of workers. When you select a relevant business object for a compensation plan or a allowance plan or any other plan, it will give you rows of data for each plan, right? So the first aspect of a business object is that it has attributes. Now, the second aspect of a business object are the instances. So obviously, when I say a car is an object and a car has a steering wheel, it has 4 wheels and a windshield and seats and so on and so forth. Now there are hundreds of different instances of a car, right? All of these cars share the same attribute. If I talk about a Maruti or Volvo or any other car or a Mercedes, they obviously all have a windshield and a steering wheel and 4 wheels and seats. But then these are all different instances of a car, right? Similarly, every employee of mine would have a name, age, gender, position. They may not have dependents and so on and so forth. So each of these employees in my system or workers in my system, whatever, is an instance of the worker business object, right? So the transactions that you create in your system, that's what generates those instances. I have a position business object. Now every position I create in my system is an instance of the position business object, right? So instances are actual data in your system, right? And this data is created, modified, changed, deleted, inactivated during your system usage or when you do your transactions. One second. Just give me one moment. Let me have some water. Right. And then the final aspect. Now, this is not relevant in the context of reporting, but since we are talking about objects, I'll talk about it. So all those related actions that you get are the actions of an object, right? So in the context of a worker, you can hire a worker, you can terminate a worker, you can change the position of a worker, you can change his location, you can add a dependent, you can add a plan, you can change his salary, and so on and so forth. So these are the actions that can be performed on a worker. With respect to a position, you can create a position, you can close a position, you can freeze a position, you can move a position from one supervisory org to another, and so on and so forth, right? In the context of an organization, once again, you can inactivate an organization, you can change the superior of an organization, and so on and so forth. So each object has a set of actions that can be performed on that object, right? In the context of Workday, we call it related actions. Okay, so the business object, as we mentioned, it basically determines what fields, excuse me, will be available on your report, right? Okay, now what is the data source? What does data source allow me to do? Or how does data source help me? Okay, so how would I decide what data source I need to select? Okay, now, so with respect to the second uh, aspect of an object, right? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes. Yeah.
all right. I just was not sure. Okay, so with respect to instances of the business object, now in my system, there are 50,000 employees, right? So do I need to get details of all the employees, or maybe only active employees, or maybe only employees in Germany, right? Or maybe only employees who are managers and above, right? In the case of a plan here, do I want to get the details of all the plans, maybe only salary and allowance plans, or maybe those plans which are part of employees' basic pay and not these plans, right? So the data source basically determines out of all the instances of that particular business object, which instances do you want on your report? So in the context of a worker, I have 100,000 workers or 50,000 workers. Now, a given report that I'm building, do I want all of those 50,000 workers on my report? Right? So that's what is determined by the data source that you select. So data source is nothing but a view, or I put it as a filter on your object instances. So a data source acts as your primary filter, right? So I need only active employees. I'll select the relevant data source. I need only terminated employees. I need only retirees. I need employees who report to me or a given manager. So the second aspect of a business object are the data source, right? Now, this is extremely critical in terms of report performance. So I've been working on a dashboard for one of my client, and it's it basically allows executives to look at a lot of metrics with respect to their employees, right? So it allows them to look at, for example, headcount by the age groups that they have, headcounts by the different job profiles they have, employee type, and so on and so forth. I've been working on this dashboard, I think, for close to a month now. The reports itself are not very complex, but then we have so many performance issues. This is a big organization. They have around 60,000 plus workers. Now, the problem is when this dashboard loads, dashboard has a timeout period. So if a report cannot load within 30 seconds, your those dashboards, it will simply show this worklet cannot be loaded. So your report have to load within that 20 or 30 seconds period, right? So when you go work for bigger projects, right? With when I say bigger projects in terms of huge organizations, report performance is one of the most critical aspect. So you may give me a report that works perfectly fine, but then it may take 15 minutes to load. Or in the case of a dashboard, maybe it doesn't load at all, right? So that's no good. So when you build a report, considering the performance of that report is extremely critical. Okay, now how can a business object allow me, or sorry, so how can a data source allow me to improve report performance? So when you've been building reports, right? Maybe it's simple advanced reports. So do you think about what data source that you select apart from whether it gives all data that you want? Is there any other consideration that you have had? Or even when you did your certification or your training, was it spoken about?
Index data, you're saying, to select? Yeah.
right? So the first, now again, as I mentioned, this is just one of the aspect of uh, building good reports, right? Just selecting an index data source is not the end of the world. Okay, so for the benefits of the others, right, who may have not uh, gone through a training, Workday training. So data sources, as I mentioned, it acts as a filter on your object instances. If you come here, when you look at a business object, it has this data sources tab. If you go here, if you see, I want only retirees in my organization, I'll select this particular data source. So worker business object has 53 data sources. Now, which of these data sources I select determines how many workers are displayed on my report. So this data source, it only returns one row for each worker, but then it only returns those workers who are retirees. So if a person is not a retiree, the report that I build, that person will not be included in that report, right? So this report, it gives me all the workers in the system. It includes all workers, even those workers who are to be hired in the future, right? This data source, it gives me all active as well as terminated workers in the system, right? So there are different data sources. I'm building a report which should be available to a manager, right? Now, as a manager, a given person should have only access to see the details of his direct reports and their associated compensation, right? So if I'm a manager and I'm managing 2 employees and a different manager is managing 10 employees, then when I run that report, I should only get data for those 2 employees and the other manager for only his 10 employees. In that case, I'll select this data source, which is my direct reports. So when you build a report using this data source, any person runs that report, it checks which supervisory org that person is a manager of, and then gives the employees of that supervisory org. So if I'm not assigned as a manager of any supervisory org, this report will give me zero output, right? So when you select a data source, select a data source which gives you the minimum number of all required instances that you need, right? So maybe you need 100 instances. I don't know what happened. Okay, so maybe you need 100 instances and there is a data source which is available, which gives you those exact 100 instances. You select that. Maybe there's no data source which gives you those exact 100 instances. There are 10 other data sources. One allows you to get 150 instances, one allows you to get 200, another allows you to get 3000, and so on and so forth. Now, in theory, you can build a report using all three of these data sources, right? Or maybe all four of these data sources. So you can create a report by selecting this data source. But the problem is, if you see, you're loading all 300 workers in your system, in your report context, and then you're putting additional filters to then remove those 200 workers, because ultimately on your report output, you just need 100 workers, right? So now your report is taking extra time to load these extra 200 workers into the report context. And then you have put an additional filter to remove those 200 extra workers. So always select a data source, the first consideration, which gives you minimum number of all required instances. The second thing is Workday has delivered these indexed data sources, right? So whenever I'm building a report, check if there is an index data source available. Now, not all business objects have index data sources, right? Even if there is an index data source available, it could happen that that index data source doesn't help you because it doesn't get you all the instances that you're looking for. In that case, there's no other way. You'll have to go for a standard data source. An index data source is again Workday delivered data source. The only difference is it is optimized for performance. So if you build a report using indexed all workers, which is an index data source, or all active and terminated workers, both report will give you the data, right? Both reports will work perfectly fine in terms of the output, but then an index data source performs much faster, right? So the first thing that you do is see if on that business object that you have decided, is there a index data source available? See, is that index data source fit for your requirement? And if it is fit for your requirement, then select an index data source, right? Okay, there are many other um, tips and tricks for report optimization. We'll talk about that. So we have standard data sources and then we have indexed data sources. So what is an indexed? The instances, what does your business object determine? The attributes or the fields that will be available on your report. What does your data source determine? The instances that will be available on your report. All right. Okay. Any questions till now?
Yeah, so the report, the screen you had opened for
Mhm.
Workday, it actually shows the list of data source for just for worker business object.
Yes. If you,
If I want to find out
mhm.
all the data sources, irrespective of a business object, how do I find out?
Again, there should be a report available. Let me first. I usually what I do is I would go to a specific business object and then that's what I always do. Okay, that's available. There's always a Workday report for anything. Okay, so let's see. Though it's in terms of when you build a report, you look at a data source in the context of a business object. That's why I mentioned I have worked on 3 reporting implementations till now. So except for BERT report, I have worked on all the report types, and then I've never had a need to do it only in this way. Okay, but for your answer, we have
Mhm.
data sources report available.
And can we create a new data source?
No, we cannot. So in Prism, we create a data source. That's a completely different concept. So in terms of Workday, we have advanced reporting, as I mentioned. So advanced reporting is basically advanced report, matrix reports, trending reports, and so on and so forth. Then the next certification that Workday offers is composite reports. Composite, right? And then we have BERT reports. Now, BERT reports are largely they are created using Studio, so they are used for creating layouts and stuff. For example, your pay slips, right? Your compensation statements. They're all created using BERT reports. So you want to, at the end of the year, when you have completed the performance review, you want to send a letter to the employee, right? It has the company logo, a short message, their rating, their new compensation scale. Those low layouts are designed by BERT reporting. And then Workday has launched, it's been a few years, something called Prism reporting. Now, what is Prism? Or it's known as Prism, not Prism reporting, it's known as Prism Analytics. So Prism Analytics basically allows you to get data from different data sources, right? So for example, in every report that we build, right, advanced reports, composite report, BERT report, or advanced reporting, all the different types, we are leveraging data that is already available in Workday, right? So if there's some data available in Workday, I use the relevant business object and then create a report for this for to leverage that data. But how is Prism reporting different? Now, Prism reporting allows me to club data from different sources. When I say different sources, these could be Workday source plus non-Workday source. So for example, let's say you have your employee data in Workday, employee data, their compensation data, their talent data, their performance data, but then you run your payroll in SAP, right? You run your payroll in SAP, maybe you use some other system for your finance. Now you want all of this data in some reports, right? You can, in Prism Analytics, it basically has three functions: ETL, right? ETL. E stands for extraction. Now this is where you get data from different sources. Workday, non-Workday, you bring all data together or you extract data. Then the second part is known as transformation, right? When you transform your data, finally what you have created is a data source. So you load this data source into Workday and it is known as Prism data source or a custom data source.
Okay.
Now this Prism data source can be used for again creating Workday reports. If you don't have Prism in your system, then you cannot create any data sources. All data sources are Workday delivered. Only if you have Prism, that's a completely different concept wherein you can get data from different sources, create a data source, and then use that data source for reporting.
So I actually see the Prism option on the advanced tab, but like it says enable for Prism. So
Yeah,
I'm not sure if we have
exactly.
Prism.
So Prism needs to be enabled in your system. Um, there's this report, again, even this tenant is not Prism enabled. Just check if you have access to this report called data catalog. This this is Prism related. So this is kind of a central Prism hub from which all Prism reporting is done. So if I go to functional areas, not sure if because Prism is not enabled, we'll have Prism. Okay. So Prism is a completely separate subscription that you have to go for, right? So you have something called tables, data sources, data catalogs. That's what Prism includes. It's a completely different concept altogether.
Okay. And sometimes when I'm creating a custom report, in the drop down, like data source drop down,
Mhm.
I don't see a data source.
Yeah,
But then when I search the data source, I find it in the
yeah,
search bar, but not in
yes,
the drop down. Why is that?
yeah. We'll talk about that. Um, okay, very valid question. I'll just jump right into that when I come to that create custom report screen. Okay. If there are no questions till now, then I can go to your question. Anyone else? Any questions in what we have discussed till now?
No, sir, I'm good.
Perfect. So to answer your question, it's if you see there is a checkbox available when I go to create custom report. Okay, let me search for all active and terminated workers. It says no matches found, right? Now the reason is, if you look at this statement here, it says showing only indexed data sources. So at this point in time, this prompt list is only showing me indexed data sources. And the reason for that is, by default, this checkbox is enabled. So because index data sources are optimized for performance, Workday in general wants you to look at an optimized data source first. So by default, this checkbox is enabled. So showing only index data sources, you can unselect option optimized for performance to show all data sources. So currently, if I search for workers for HCM reporting, which is again a data source on worker, if you see this data source is available, and that's because if you look at this icon over here, this is actually an index data source. So if I unselect this and now search for all active and terminated worker, right? Clearing this checkbox enables you to select non-index data sources, which may cause your report to run slower. All active and terminated workers. Right now, my data source is available. Answers your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so that is about the business objects, the data sources, the basic introduction of reporting in Workday. Okay, so the task for creating a report is create custom report. Now, anyone, what is the difference between a simple report and an advanced report?
Simple report, we just have option to select the fields, sort it, and filter it, right? And in advanced, we have lot other options of sharing the reports.
Yeah, that's perfect. So basically, I have been in work.
XML enabled the
Perfect. Yes,
yes.
yes. So basically, uh, the gist of your answer is for others, do not use simple report, right? It's everything that a simple report can do can be done by an advanced report. Advanced report then gives you many other advanced options. So for example, currently this is how the screen looks. Let me select advanced. Now the moment I select advanced, if you see another checkbox gets enabled, right? Now an advanced report can be used as a web service. Now web service is basically used in EIBs or integrations to send data from Workday to a third party system, right? Now if uh, only an advanced report can be used as a data source, as a web service to send data from Workday to a third party system as part of an integration, right? In addition to that, there are many other aspects that an advanced report has over a simple report. So for all practical purposes, simple report is, I have not used simple report till date in the last 6 years, right? Okay, so simple report is not required at all. If you look at the description, it says a simple report provides a straightforward user interface that allows a user to select a set of fields, optionally specify sort and filter criteria. So this is all a simple report does. So you can select a field only from the primary business object. You cannot select any fields from a related business object. I'll come to that in a bit. And then you cannot share that report. Many other functions are not available. Output functions are not available. The second paragraph, it says an advanced report provides all the features of a simple report plus more advanced features such as accessing related business objects, RBOs. So you can access related business objects in an advanced report. You can do headings, subtotals, filtering, worklets, and many other things. Right? Now, what is this accessing related business objects and stuff? So when you come in here, when you come to create custom report, right? And when you select a data source. So when I come in here and when I select a data source on my report, so for example, workers for HCM reporting, what Workday does is this data source is associated with the worker business object, right? So every data source is associated with only one business object. So the moment I do that, and when I go inside, Workday pre-selects the business object. So now when I go in, all workers, Cloud Foundation, all workers. When I go in here, click OK. You see that this is an index data source, which is also identified by this lightning bolt icon. But then now my business object is pre-selected, which means now what I can do is if I want, I can select any of the 53 other business objects available. So worker business object has, any of the 53, 52 other data sources on worker. So even at this point in time, if I want, I can select a standard data source or any other data source. But then now it allows me to only select those data sources which are available on the worker business object. So once you have selected a data source, you have obviously selected the business object. Now you realize maybe this is not the right business object. You'll have to delete that report and create a new one. So primary business object on a report cannot be changed. You can change the data source if you want to. Right? So the business object associated with the data source that you have selected, that becomes your primary business object, right? So this is the business object on which you're building your report, right? Now, when I said the business object that you select, it defines the fields that are available on your report. So for example, if I select worker business object, I can select, yeah, question? Okay, so when I select worker business object, within on this report, now I can select worker's name, I can select worker's date of birth, I can select worker's age, and so on and so forth. So I can select all the fields which are available on my worker business object, which is the primary business object, right? I can also select dependents and the plans. But then if you see, position in turn is a business object in itself. Similarly, dependence is a different business object. A plan is a different business object. Now, dependents in turn have their own attributes. So for example, when for a dependent, the attribute could be the dependent type. So son, daughter, wife, mother, father, the type of the dependent, right? The age of the dependent, the name of the dependent. These are all attributes of the dependent business object, right? The plan again has its own attributes because plan is also a business object. Similarly, position has its own attributes. Position is also a business object. So if you see, every business object or no business object stands in isolation. One business object is related or can be related to one or multiple other business objects. So in the context, if I say EMP1, whose name is again EMP1, right? So EMP1, whose age is 50 years, gender is male, position is CEO. He has 5 dependents and he has some ABC or 10 plans, right? He has salary and compensation and allowance. Now, if I want to get into the details of these dependents, as I mentioned, this is a separate business object in itself. Position is in a separate business object in itself. So this business object is related to worker. Worker occupies a position. So EMP1 is occupying this position called CEO. And the inverse relationship is this position called CEO is occupied by a worker EMP1. The date the position was created was 2010, let's say. The organization is Office of CEO and so on and so forth. So these are the attributes of this worker. And these are the attributes of the position that is associated with this worker. So there exists a relationship between different business objects, right? Now this relationship can be a one-on-one relationship or one-to-many relationship. In the context of Workday, we call it a single instance or a multi-instance. So for example, an employee is associated with only one primary position. But then an employee can have 0 to multiple dependents. So this employee, let me put it here. I'm deleting this, right? If I talk about dependents, these are all the dependents in the system, 3, 4, 5. So this employee is associated with this dependent and this dependent. So these two dependents or these two instances of the dependent business object is linked to this one instance of the primary of the worker business object. So this is where you have single instance and multi-instance. So when I come to a field and when I search for a field, let's say name, we'll talk about these other field types as well. So I'm selecting name. Right? I'm selecting position. So this is the worker's primary position. And if you look at this icon and then this description here, it is a single instance. That means a worker can only be associated with one primary position. So this field, if you see, it links worker business object with position business object. So worker in this context is the primary business object and position is the related business object, right? If you go to business object details report, on each business object, in addition to the fields on that business object, the data sources on that business object, there is another tab called related business objects. Now this shows all business objects that are related to this particular business object, right? And if I scroll down, you'll find positions as well there, right? Now, in the context of a reporting, when you select any business object on a report, that particular business object in the context of that report becomes your primary business object. So if you build a report using position, position becomes your primary business object, and you want to get the worker details who are associated with that position. Worker is the related business object because you're getting data for position, and then in the context of that position, you're getting the details of the worker or workers who are associated with that position. So the primary business object and the related business object is in the context of a report. If I had built a report using position, then position would have become my primary business object. So whenever you build a report, you can get fields which are directly associated with the primary business object, as well as fields which are associated with the related business objects. So when I build a report on worker, I can get all of these fields, but then I can also get these fields because these fields are associated with position, and position business object is related to worker business object, right? So you can get fields directly from the PBO on your report. So this PBO, let's say, is worker once again, right? So name of the worker is associated with directly with the worker, right? That is an attribute of the worker. Uh, Position is an attribute of worker. Age is an attribute of worker. So you can get all of these fields because they are directly associated with worker. But in turn, position itself is a business object and it has its own attributes. So the name of the position is its attribute. The effective date of the position is an attribute, and so on and so forth. So when you're building a report on worker, you can get these fields as well as fields which are related to the related business object up to one level, right? So position in itself, for example, is related to, let's say, just for the sake of it, some sales plan. I'm just taking a hypothetical example. In the context of, let's say, finance statement, right? I'm just making this example. So when you're building a report on worker, you can get the name, position, age, all of these, but finance statement also has its own details. For example, the year and so on and so forth. Now you cannot get these details, right? So you can only get those attributes which are directly related to your PBO and those attributes which are related to the RBO of your PBO. That is one level deep. Make sense? We'll see this in action. So this is just a theory. Okay, so in terms of relation, there are two-way relations, right? So for example, or before I go there, we have already spoken of a single instance and multi-instance. Now, how do you see it in the context of a report? So as I mentioned, when you see a position, this identifies a single instance because a worker can only be associated with one primary position, right? But if I search for dependent, right? If you see, this is a multi-instance because a worker may have zero dependents or he may have multiple dependents, right? So this identifies this is an instance field. That means this is in turn a business object. If you see this field, it links a worker business object with the dependent business object. Now you want to get additional details of the position. As I mentioned, you can go one level deep, right? So when you're building a report on worker is your primary PBO, wherein you have got the name of the worker, the position of the worker, age of the worker. Now you want to get additional details of the position. So how do you do that? Now you can come in here, add a new row. So this is the business object, right? Here I'm getting details of the primary business object, but then I want to get details of position. So I can add position here. Right now, here what I get is the details of the related business object. So in the context here, worker is my primary business object. Now if you see, what you see here are all the details of the position, right? So this is all the details of the position, and position is in turn related to finance and many other concepts, right? So these are all the attributes or fields which are available on the position. So for example, what roles are assigned on this position, and so on and so forth, right? But then if I go to one of these, for example, I cannot now go into assignable role and get the details of that assignable role, because here I have the primary business object. That primary business object is linked to this related business object. This related business object in turn has its own relations. So I cannot go more than one level deep, right? So here, role or assignable role in turn is a business object which is related to position. So when I'm building a report on worker, I cannot get the details of the role. Make sense? So we have primary single instance fields, we have multi-instance fields, right? And we'll see that is in action later. So in terms of field types, we already know that each business object has a number of attributes which are defined or represented in terms of fields. And these fields can be of different types. We have looked at two of those types, single instance and then multi-instance. Now, in terms of how the data looks, we'll run this report and see that later.